All right, so let's talk quads. You've done your leg day, you've done your squats, you've done your leg presses. Your quads are probably sore. You gotta stretch them. Before you leave, you gotta make sure that you do something to restore the mobility in your quads. And there are a couple of ways to do that. One of the first things that I want to try and point out, even before we get into the stretches themselves, is the mechanics of a quad stretch. So your quads, there's multiple muscles that run down the front of your leg that we classify or just call them quads, and they attach at different points of your hip. So when we think about stretching your quads, one of the most common mistakes we see is people arching or hyperextending at the hip, which means that, again, you are not doing anything for your quad. Why? Because if you think about the mechanics of where your quads are, right now, as you do this, you're shortening the distance between your knee and your hip. So by tucking your hips under and engaging your core like you do when you're doing thrusts, that is actually going to help extend your quads more. So anytime you're doing a quad stretch, you really got to think about tucking your hips under, or if you were to look down, I always think about the cue, which is kind of interesting, but like find your crotch. Where's your crotch? Think about looking under and tucking your hips under. That's a very good cue to always think about how to engage your core to tuck your hips in a quad stretch. The easiest one, if you don't have a lot of time or if you don't have anywhere to kneel, is a standing quad stretch. You could grab onto something if you feel like you need a balance, but always think about standing firmly with one leg, lifting up and staying nice and elongated, lifting one leg up, and as you tuck your hips, tucking them under, you should now feel a quad stretch. Now, if you feel a stretch here, then I want you to actively think about starting to drive that knee back. So if you can see, I'm starting to drive it back more parallel to my other leg while keeping my core engaged and my hips tucked under. As soon as I do that, I release that stretch. So this is the most important part of the stretch, which is the part that most people forget when you're stretching your quad. Okay? So really think about tucking your hips under, really stretching from here. And as you pull as well towards your butt, that foot towards your butt, don't so much think about pulling your foot towards your butt, but more your ankle towards your butt. If you really think, if you pull on the foot, you can also be pulling on your knee and all those tendons and ligaments on your knee, which you don't want. So really think about pulling at the ankle itself in that stretch. And again, think about driving that knee back. Hold it for 6 deep breaths and bring it down. Now, if that's not enough, let's say that you feel like, yeah, okay, that's a stretch, but I feel like I could use a little more. My hips feel really tight. These guys here feel really tight from sitting all day. You might want to bring it down to the floor. And right now I'm going to be using a bench. You can use a bench, but ideally I want you to go to a wall. And the reason I want you to do that is because I want you to get that knee right in between the joint of the wall and the floor. In this case, I'm going to put it right there. And we're going to go back into that same kind of stretch that we were in before. You're going to get yourself in a lunge and push back. So again, see how my hips right now want to arch and my lower back wants to arch? That's because that's the most comfortable position for that quad. Now, if I really want to get that into a stretch, I want to think about tucking under. And it will very likely be just waiting here. This is a lot more intense than the one standing, but it is also great for tight hip flexors. So if you're really suffering with tight hip flexors and these are painful every day, this is what you want to go for. The less flexible you are, the more you want to get that front foot away from the wall and just tuck your hips under. Okay? And hold it there for, again, about 6 deep breaths. Every time you exhale, think about relaxing that muscle so that you get yourself into a deeper stretch. And as that gets more comfortable, you can start getting yourself more and more vertical. And that is how you stretch your quads.